Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my amazing co-host, Donovan. And today we have a special guest, Lane Kawaoka, and he is known as the real estate anti-guru of adding tremendous giveaway value. He currently owns 6,500 units. He's a writer for Forbes, and he's been on top 50 investing podcasts and has an amazing Amazon bestseller. So please welcome Lane. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Aloha,
Yes.
everybody.
Aloha. Yes. So tell us a little about your story into becoming an investor into real estate and your passion for it.
Yeah, so I grew up on this linear path. We weren't broke, but we weren't super rich as kids. We were taught to be really frugal with our money. Go to a restaurant, never order soft drinks because that's just costs too much money. And go to school, study hard, be a good little boy and girl, and work at a job for 40 to 50 years, buy a house to live in, invest in all that normal 401k type of stuff. Became an engineer because that's what you do, I guess, or some kind of high paid profession, right? That's all we're supposed to do. And I started to work and, again, so good with my money, right? Like a lot of my clients were good savers. We're not in credit card debt or any of that type of stuff. I was able to buy a house to live in right after college, couple years, saved up, 80 grand down payment on a $350,000 house in Seattle. And because I was working on the road all the time for work, because I was in construction as an engineer, I was never home. And, for a young 20-something-year-old kid, that was a lot of, it's kind of silly to have this big house and never home. And, back then they didn't have like Turo or anything like that, but I don't know where I got the idea. I was like, I'll just call up an old like property manager that I rented from in college and just start renting it out. And that was the point where I kind of pivoted off of that linear path. And I was like, whoa, what did I just do here? I could just rent this property out. And if I just repeated this several more times, I'll be pretty quickly out of this rat race we all called job work and retirement savings. And that was kind of the start of it all. Started to realize that a lot of people out there make way more returns, a lot safer, not investing in the normal Wall Street traditional investments and get into more alternative investments, which include residential real estate or rental properties.
So it's a really interesting story, like kind of this evolution from a more like tried and true traditional path to this more real estate focus. I did have a question around sort of, you said your background, your upbringing had sort of a frugal frame on it, right? And I'm curious if you ran into any struggles around sort of buying property and as you expanded, getting into, because you need a lot of debt to be able to finance this stuff. So I'm just curious if you had any struggles there around like sort of that background and adding debt as you added on more properties, or if the cash flow and the numbers was enough to make you just be like, no, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got into it. I kind of fell into it, right? Like I saw the cash flow coming in. And the reason why you invest in residential real estate is you make money four ways: cash flow, appreciation, and tax benefits. And the fact that the game changer is, buying a house to live in is okay. But when you buy residential real estate, the tenants are the suckers paying down your mortgage for you. When it's your house, you're the sucker putting in your heart, sweat, and tear paying that thing down. And that's the big difference. They're paying down your mortgage and building your equity for you. And that's the game changer. But then, there's different paradigms of financial advice. People out there are credit card debt, really bad with their money. Just call them the 99% out of there. For those types of people, I think that, they can't differentiate between good debt and bad debt. They're all in credit card debt. They buy crap that they can't afford, that they shouldn't have in the first place. Now, for those types of people, buying a house to live in is a good forced piggy bank because they have to pay their mortgage. It kicks them out on the street and evicts them, or they get foreclosed on. So, but then, what about people like myself, right? The good little boys and girls out there that, got good jobs. We pay more than our fair share of taxes, right? The middle class are the ones paying all the taxes. It's not the wealthy people. You kind of get into that, how the wealthy people get around taxes. It's not the broke people, the poor people, right? They just get all the government entitlements. It's kind of this hardworking suckers in the middle, right? That I kind of grew up in, and that was kind of my linear path. And those are the people that kind of power society forward. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of saw it like, my at the end of the day, like, it's your net worth. That's all that really matters.
Right.
Sophisticated, high net worth people don't really care about the interest rate you're paying or the amount of debt. That's what average people think of. Average people will really never get above $1 or $2 million net worth.
Mm-hmm.
But the wealthy people look at, well, how is this impacting my net worth? And can I do this safely and prudently, which is, can I go into investments that give me ample cash flow, right? Because cash flow allows you to breathe and hold on to the asset in bad times. So you want to maximize your amount of impact to your net worth while optimizing your amount of cash flow, right? Just enough to get the optimal returns. But I mean, I've written a bunch of articles in Forbes on this topic of debt, right? People can't seem to differentiate between good debt and bad debt, but that's what the wealthy do. They use debt where, the debt service coverage ratio, 1.25 is what we usually try and hit at our large apartment complexes. The income that we make more than hits and covers the monthly debt service. We make money every single month.
Right. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that you distinguish the difference between good debt and bad debt, because I think for a lot of people that's not even something that crosses their mind. It's like something to take into consideration. I actually had bought my first house about 5 years ago, and initially I was just planning to live in it, but then similarly like you, I was traveling a lot, and I decided to just rent it out for Airbnb while I traveled, and that paid for my mortgage. Or sometimes I would just like have it listed, and then I was like, oh, someone booked it, so I got to go see something else, or I got to travel somewhere new because but then eventually I moved across the country, and I just decided to find a family to rent it long term, and I just sold it actually last year, and made a profit. So it's definitely, it wasn't necessarily my intention, but life circumstances went through a breakup and things like that had me not live in it. So, but I would be curious for people who, they do need another place to live. Like I could actually stay with, friends or family, or had other circumstances that made it more doable to not live in my own house. But how would you suggest, like, people that don't have any other place to go, if they wanted to rent out their house, what should they do?
I mean, look, this is the hardest part about wealth building, right? That first 100 grand of net worth. Most of my clients, they make 6 figures. They have a net worth of over $1 million net worth. They've kind of passed that scale.
Right.
It's kind of a coming of age. It's like wealth building adolescence. If you don't have, you need money to invest. If you don't have money, that's what these more active strategies like house flipping, wholesaling, those are kind of more strategies for broke people, right? Like most of my folks who went to college were good savers. We can just patiently save and buy and acquire these passive income generators, or what we call pigs. So, I mean, continuing on my story, I bought that first rental and I was like, oh, shoot, this worked. So what does that guy do? But keep buying some more. So, I mean, took me, the first one I bought was 2009. And then 2015, I had 11 of these rental properties and just kept rolling along with this. But once you own a few rental properties, you start to realize they're not really scalable. And that was kind of where the next pivot that happened for me, when I started to interact with more accredited high net worth investors. And a lot of the message that these guys had was, you don't want to own rental properties. That's how you get yourself unbroke, above $500,000, $1 million net worth. But once you ascend to that point, it's more about taxes, legal protection, and scaling your investments in different private placements and syndications where you're doing value add real estate investing.
So it sounds like you've laid out like a couple different steps, right? Potential steps on like a financial ladder. I would be curious for you, as you've sort of gone through these steps, where your biggest headaches or roadblocks or learnings or whatever else were, right? Because like, the typical path, the first step that you sort of mentioned is fairly straightforward, right? You go to school in some sort of field that allows you to get a pretty good salary, and then you do your job. But I'd be curious, where you've seen some of the like biggest learnings or roadblocks or whatever else might be worth sharing between some of those tiers.
Right. So like, kind of to break it down, there's kind of 3 different levels, right? Simple passive cash flow 0.0 is don't be a bonehead with your money, right? Don't buy things you don't need. Keep a freaking budget, like, I mean, I think the people who are listening on the podcast were usually a little bit better at this, right? But like I said, most people struggle with this because their parents didn't teach them this stuff. I mean, where else do we get our money medals from but our parents and family and friends? But once you're able to save $10, $20, $30,000 a year, right? The first step is to go buy a rental property. There are turnkey rentals out there, and to invest prudently, you want to invest in things that cash flow. And how do you do that? Well, we look for this one thing called the 1% rent to value ratio or greater. So it's pretty simple, like, math exercise. You take the monthly rent divided by the purchase price, and we're looking for something that's 1% or higher so that we know we're going to be cash flow positive every month. So, this is why we don't buy properties in Seattle, Portland, all of California, New York, right? Because, you'd be lucky to find a place in the ghetto for 500 grand that luckily rents for 200, 2,500 a month. So 2,500 a month divided by 500,000 is 0.5%, right? Where the other places in the country, which have much better ratios, where you can get closer to that 1%. And this is where you're making money every single month. So if a recession comes, you're cool. You're just cash flowing. You're chilling, right? Where everybody else is losing the property, can't pay, has to feed their debt service. And then, we focus in on red states because we're the landlords. We want the landlord laws on our side. This is why we don't invest in the blue states. And then typically we'll invest in population growth areas, which are typically your Sunbelt states on the southern end of the United States. Is kind of our rough rubric.
Are you going in more like metropolitan areas or more like country, rural, or kind of?
So the markets that we'll go in, we want to go into established cities, right? So I try to stay above 250,000, 500,000 population. So no pull down tertiary markets, right? So that said, we're not going to go smack dab in the core business district, right? Because you're not going to hit your rent to value ratios that you need in there. So we're typically around like the outer rim of the city. California, Portland's a little bit different, but like, your Atlanta, your Texas, there's usually a web system in the highways. So it's usually outside of that inner web, 20 minutes, 45 minutes outside the city center, sort of suburbish. But, we'll focus on these garden style type of apartments, 2 to 3 stories, or, some of the newer investors will, when they're starting out, we'll pick up these 1,400 square foot houses, 3 bedroom, 2 baths that rent for about $1,000 a month that you can pick up for 100 grand purchase price.
Nice. And are you just having a property manager just manage it all? Or?
Oh yeah. Like, like our job as investors is to go make more money and go find more investments. Right? The property manager's job is to manage the property, even though you have to pay them. And this is a big mistake I think that old school mom and pop investors make. They focus on being a landlord and not an investor. I remember when I was in college, like the landlord would come around in his Mercedes and fix the toilet while his poor wife would have to wait in the car for him to do this nonsense because he's just too cheap to hire somebody. And that was probably predicated by the fact that that property was not a good investment to begin with. It didn't hit the 1% rent to value ratio, and he had to put in his own sweat equity to make the numbers work. Or lose less money per month and gamble on appreciation.
Right.
So I'm going to keep pulling you back to sort of these like boundary levels, just because I think it's going to apply to the most people, right? So I'd be curious, for people who are in some of these areas that you mentioned, right? Like the Bay Area or Seattle, some places that you can pull down pretty high salaries, but that the 1% rule absolutely does not exist anywhere in that area. How can someone start looking in geographies that aren't near them, right? Like what are some of the tools or strategies that they can use to get, maybe outer Atlanta or some of these other places you mentioned? Because obviously, if you're living in one place and not in the other place, you're not going to be super familiar with the market and whatnot.
Yeah, you're I think it's good to just spell it out there, right? Hey dude, like out there, if you live in the Bay Area or all of the state of California, it ain't gonna work out there. As you say out there, no bueno. The numbers aren't gonna work.
Yeah.
Right? You're competing with a bunch of people who are unsophisticated money and just have too much money out there. It ain't gonna work unless you want to gamble on appreciation. And the reason why we call it simple passive cash flow is because cash flow is king. Cash flow keeps the investment prudent, conservative, as opposed to gambling on appreciation. So this is what I did. I was living in Seattle for about 12, 14 years, and I was doing all my whole operation out of there, buying properties in Birmingham, Atlanta, and Indianapolis. The linchpin of this is finding that property management first, right? I mean, brokers are kind of a dime a dozen. You never trust a broker, right? and never trust a lending broker too. They just want you to transact so they can get their fees. That property manager is the one who's actually going to be stuck with you, managing hand in hand with the tenant at the end of the day. So that's the linchpin in all this. Finding somebody who comes off referral, who's reliable, who's going to manage that property for you and manage the tenant relationship for you. We offer a free remote investor like e-course on my website. People can, they can go to simplepassivecashflow.com/turnkey, get access to that for free. It kind of dives into like the weeds a little bit, right? But I think it's important if somebody's going to throw out $30,000, and most of our folks, we don't go and visit the property. That's a freaking waste of time, right? When our time value of money is so high, right? And especially a lot of us only have 2 weeks of vacation. It just doesn't make sense to go out there and do a trip. I mean, maybe at some point you do, but this is again why we buy commodities, right? The 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,400 square foot. It's not going to be in the best area in the city, but you definitely don't want to be in kind of a lower class D, class C area or worse. Right?
Okay. How does one determine what class each area is? Is there just like a Google search, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, good question, right? Like, so there's not going to be any grading system. So we grade properties and neighborhoods on an A through D. I mean, we call D properties war zone properties. Your A class area is going to be the area that I'm sure all you guys, people listening, like to hang out, right? It's the safest area. It's the hip area. Your numbers aren't going to work there. You're not going to find the rent to value ratios to be able to work out there. Your class B are going to be more your blue collar, white collar mix. It's not going to be in the best school districts. It's not going to be in the safest areas. But what you want to be looking out for are, at least there's no violent crime there, right? There's going to be graffiti, there's going to be theft, but you're looking for those pockets where it's just, this is where, and I think for me, it was a big culture shock, right? Like coming from middle class America, most people live in B and C class type of housing where it's relatively safe in the daytime, but you and I probably wouldn't want to be hanging out at nighttime in there. And then an even lower class is kind of that C grade. And, now you're talking, a B class would be like 1970s, 1990s build. C class might be a threshold lower, 1950s, 1970s, but in a, rougher area than the Bs. So typically the sweet spot that we'll like to buy with the optimal amount of cash flow, and it's good, still good, safe, solid areas, that kind of that B minus sweet spot. I mean, luckily you're not ranching the damn thing, right? You're outsourcing the property manager out. You never really have to go out there.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a ton of sort of legwork that you can do, or like research, or different resources that you can sort of tap into to get a pretty good idea of what's going on in an area without actually having to go out there and check things out. I'd be curious if there. I don't know this much about it, but I know there are like groups, right? Like investing groups that you can get into or be a part of. And then there's also sort of going like more solo and buying a property yourself. I'll just be curious what sort of your like opinion or experiences with some of these different modes of sort of investing in real estate.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not an accredited investor, especially if you're under like $250,000 net worth, like you're not really allowed to participate in a syndication or private placement. The operator of the syndication really shouldn't allow you to participate, right? Because you're just not a good investor. You don't have that much money, and you'll probably be a pain in the butt to the operator. And this is the hard part, right? Like I said, the hardest part is getting started. That first 100 grand, $250,000 net worth. You got to do it yourself, and you got to let time kind of be your friend and have your net worth grow, and supplement that with your day job. But I think something really happens early on is you start to realize how much more money you're making it this way, and you have control, and you stop funding all the 401ks, the Roth IRAs. The wealthy don't do that type of stuff, right? That's only like that's the retail investment market. But we've all been conditioned otherwise. I mean, it took me like 5-10 years to finally pull the plug on my 401ks until I finally realized what it all was. But everybody moves at their own pace. But at some point, you kind of pull the plug on it. You kind of go more into alternative investments, your own rental properties, or at that point, if you're higher income, maybe you can start participating in private placements or syndications. You have the network, right? Other peer colleagues, and who to trust out there. But it's a slow transition. But for most people, 5 to 10 years, they can get financially free doing this type of stuff, and it totally transcends the average, the traditional wealth building. And I tell everybody, like, look, I mean, if everybody just bought a handful of rentals like how I did, it doesn't take that long, maybe 5 years if you're a diligent saver. You probably don't have to work into your 40s, and but don't do that, because society would probably crumble, right? If all these guys just found the quick way out of the rat race. Who would pay all the taxes? Who would build bridges? Who would perform surgery on people? Who would be a social worker? Like, it just, society couldn't sustain that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be curious, what was I'm assuming that you're not practicing as a civil engineer anymore. Maybe that's the case, but like, how long did you decide, okay, now is the time to like leave my job and just do this?
Yeah, I mean, my progression was a lot slower, right? Then, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. Like, I would pay down my properties, which,
yeah,
I think that's traditionally something they tell you to do, which I'm going to say is completely wrong. You don't want to pay off your properties. You always want to go with the 30-year mortgage and pay the least as possible, and concentrate your money to buy more passive income generators, pigs. But I did a lot of that stuff. Like, it just took me longer, right? Like, it took me 11 rentals, 2015, but I was a really good saver. And then there were a handful of years there that I was putting away like $80,000-$100,000 a year, not to the normal retirement stuff, but straight to rental properties. And that really sped things up for me. But, when I started to buy apartment complexes and we started to syndicate deals with other people, that was kind of the point where I need to focus on. I mean, I kind of traded one job for another in a way, right?
Yeah.
But as far as passive income goes, I mean, that's kind of the lessons that I've learned from other people. Is like, you're always going to keep working. You're always going to be doing something. And if you can find a way to, today we value add apartments, we improve the communities. Like, that's, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? And we make a whole lot of money in the process, right? Like, I mean, what more ikigai can you get?
Right.
So we talked a lot about sort of the money pieces and sort of like moving your pieces around and moving up and pieces like that. I would be curious, since this is a podcast, around happiness, some of your journey as you've transitioned through these different like phases in your life? Do you find like now that you feel the most fulfilled? Did you love your old job? Like, I'd just be curious what some of those parts were for you.
Yeah, so like I would say like my first pivot in terms of like mindset and happiness came when I had like those 15 rentals. Like those 15 rentals, and they brought in maybe like $3,000 passive income a month, which by no means sustains an American family, right? Like most people, they need 10 grand to do so. But in my head, I mean, I was in my late 20s at the time. I knew I didn't have to keep working my crummy job if I didn't have to,
Mhm.
pretty soon. I could quit whenever I kind of wanted to. And I kind of, I think a lot of young people or financially young people, they get to a point, their idea is to retire and sit on the beach and do nothing. I kind of did that like for a couple of months. I just didn't care about work. I could just give a rip, right? Like my boss told me something, like whatever. I make more money than you guys, at the end of the day by just sitting here.
Mhm.
So I eventually changed jobs a lot. Like I would find easier, more cruise jobs, and I would have a lot more time to think. And that could be a good or bad thing, right?
Yeah.
But my whole thought was like, like a lot of people, they go around and they like, what do you do when you're financially free? Right? You go around, you travel, you take pictures of your food, put it on Instagram, stupid stuff like that. But like it gets super old
Mm.
after a while. You show me somebody who keeps doing that stuff, I'll show you somebody who hasn't been financially free more than 6 months. Granted, some people could probably, do that type of nonsense for several years, but you come to a point where it's like, all right, well, you've been given this gift that most people do not get, right? Like my parents worked to their like regular retirement age, 60, 70 years. That doesn't mean they have enough money to retire. That's most people's paradigm. But here I have the rest of my life to do whatever the heck I want because the money keeps working harder for me and it's going to continue to grow. I can sit on a beach, drink pina coladas, and take pictures of my food, or my life's a canvas. So I mean, I just kind of focus on what I was doing best. That was kind of why I created like the Simple Passive Cash Flow podcast, just to kind of give back and help people dispel a lot of the financial dogma out there that we're all kind of taught to eat. Because I realized that was kind of what I was passionate about, and that was what I was kind of good at. And I talked about that concept of ikigai, right? Apparently, like when people team up and we buy an apartment together, we can make a lot of money too, right? Awesome. But if I can, change the people's paths from investing in the 401k nonsense, get them on alternative path, and now, or like just the taxes, right? Like if we implement real estate professional status, which is a checkbox on their taxes, now one of the spouses can stay at home and they make more money at the end of the day. They don't pay, they by doing that, you implement rep status. Now you can use passive losses you get, these deductions you get from real estate to offset your ordinary income. It's a beautiful thing. And it's just all about being tax smart, financially minded smart, than working harder for the man. But that was for me. I mean, I've kind of followed Tony Robbins a little bit. He always says, well, you're happier, or the thing at the top of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, or his 6 needs he talks a lot about, is like, giving back, finding a way to add value to each other. And you see a lot of rich people doing that. And but that was kind of my way. Like, I'm not going to be somebody who builds something, Habitat for Humanity. I don't like to build stuff. Like that's, I think you have to figure out your way to like give, your unique way where you can exponentially add value. If not, you can just build some houses on Saturday with Habitat for Humanity. Nothing wrong with that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you, as much as sitting on a beach and drinking pina coladas sounds great, it gets boring after a while. And it's nice to be able to work at doing something that you love, that you're passionate about, and contributes back to other people versus just like the average grind of having to work to get by. You have the ability to work because it's your passion, and that's exciting, and that's a something a lot of people don't get to experience.
Yeah. And you meet a lot of eclectic people too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people who are kind of stuck in the day job, stuck in the matrix, haven't eaten the red pill yet. Yeah, they're cool, nice people, but when you find, gunslingers who are kind of living this more aggressive entrepreneurial path, or really like designing their lifestyle with endless boundaries, which sounds really corny. Like
Yeah.
it is very kind of increases the zest for life, right?
Mhm.
There's kind of, some people, I'm kind of see myself more of a creative, I guess. To me, that's very enlightening when you interact with those types of people. And come to find out, they're free at lunch too. Like it's just the working stiffs that aren't around during this time of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm. Cool. Well, Lane, thanks so much for joining us on our show. Is there anything you'd like to plug or anything else you'd want to share before we wrap up today?
No, no. If kind of pique people's interests, you gotta just you gotta buy rental properties, or if you're a little bit higher net worth, syndications and private placements are probably going to be a little bit more, based on your time, you know. But yeah, I'd say get educated, right? Society is built on you investing in these Wall Street products, which just makes Wall Street rich via these 401ks and Roth IRAs, etc. You got to get off the beaten path, but you got to find a tribe, which is what we've created with a community of other investors. And yeah, it works. It works. That's for sure. But you got to do something a little bit different than the average bear out there.
Right. Yeah. Step outside the normal path that most people take, and
Yeah.
a lot of things can unfold in
Right.
beautiful ways. Yes. Awesome, Lane. Well, thank you again so much for being on our show.
Well,
Yes.
thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. And thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the things to spread more happiness in the world. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.